Hello and welcome along to another session episode of In Conservation With. My name is David Lindo. I'm also known as the Urban Birder. And today, I am speaking with Amar Ayyash about gulls and in particular his latest book, his new book, The Gulls of North America. Very exciting. One of my favorite groups of birds. Before we actually kick off, I just want to say that a big thank you actually to our sponsors. That's Cower Sporting Optics, the manufacturers of the world-renowned Promenade series of spotting scopes, as well as Birds, Wildlife and Nature, the tour company that strives to deliver the best of birding and wildlife watching opportunities throughout the world. So thank you very much, guys. Ayash, sorry, Amar even. Amar, it's great to have you here. Let me just ask you quickly, how are you and where are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. It's a really hectic time right now with just lots of going on, birding and inquiries and the book stuff. And it's just been great. And family stuff today. It's Thanksgiving here in the States. Um, and we have a couple family commitments this afternoon. So I'm trying to get that straight. Right now it's 1:40 p.m. I live right outside of the Chicago region. I'm about 30 minutes from downtown Chicago. So it's considered the southwestern suburbs of Chicago. And matter of fact, I'll be gull watching tomorrow in the city, trying to find a glaucous gull for a friend of mine who has just tied the county big year record.
Wow.
So I learned this morning that he tied the record with a golden eagle, and we'll be out there tomorrow trying to find him a glaucous gull to break the record.
Is there one around? Is it
Um,
that's
I
what it's
I know I know of a couple hot spots where if you're familiar with getting through some back alleys and some industrial areas, I know one of the best sites to find them in Chicago, and that's where he needs it. He needs it in the county.
Wow, okay. For those who don't know Amar, he and I met, we actually physically met 2 years ago, just after I sort of suffered a bout of COVID, and you did a talk somewhere. What was it? Was it the Indiana Dunes festival? And I was in the audience, so it was really great and fascinating to listen to this man talking about gulls. But he's both an expert on the gulls of North America and an evangelist for gull recreation. So we need to talk about what that is. He coordinates the Illinois Ornithological Society's annual Gull Frolic on Lake Michigan, and I noticed on Facebook you got some press on that, didn't you? Oh, you did some sort of thing recently.
Yeah, we are almost at capacity. So this is the 23rd year for the event, and registration typically sells out before we can even get it out to the public. Like people stalk our website and wait for the date and sign up. It's in mid-February and we're already sold out here in November.
Fantastic. You also host a popular website, anythinglarus.com, and is often found speaking at birding events throughout North America. Much of your free time is dedicated to traveling the world to photograph and study gulls. Amar has published a number of papers and articles on gull identification, distribution, and molt, and you are the author of the Gull Guide, which we are looking at here. So fantastic. Let me ask you the question: have you always been interested in birds?
Not necessarily birds. I began my journey looking at gulls before I considered myself a birder. Before I even knew there was organized birding. I'd never been introduced to bird watching through friends or an organization. I just happened on gulls at a younger age and was fascinated by them and was captivated by just the variety I was seeing. I didn't have any notion of, this is a ring-billed gull or a herring gull. I just looked at them without any books, without any guidance or direction from bird watchers, and I eventually out gull watching would run into bird watchers with scopes, and I didn't know that these were scopes that were bought and purchased to look at birds. So that's how I was introduced to birding. Just happened on bird watchers while I was out in the field watching my own gulls. I called them seagulls at the time. Didn't know that word was looked down on. But so, David, to answer your question, after meeting a number of birders and getting involved with Christmas bird counts, I think I officially became a birder by meeting.
That's quite funny, actually. Seagulls. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, every time, it's almost as bad as saying Twitcher to me now. Every time someone who's not a birder says to me seagulls, I always have to stop and say, do you realize that the gull you're referring to is actually technically a coastal gull? The herring gull is not really a seagull when you compare it to something like the only seagull we have in Britain, which is the black-legged kittiwake. People are like, yeah, just totally. What is the? I mean, for example, in Britain, people, general public, see seagulls in inverted commas as vermin, those pesky feathered scoundrels. Every year, I'm on the radio defending them because people are saying they'd been attacked by gulls. I remember one time, and I think I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because maybe you haven't heard it. I was approached to speak to a radio station in London, and the presenter said that he had a report from some solicitors who were working in an area which is called Lincoln Inn's Fields, which is like the lawyer central, basically. That's where they all hang out, all the top ones that wear wigs and stuff. And they said that they were being attacked by gulls at lunchtime. And I said, there might be lawyers, but they're liars. There's no way a gull is going to be attacking people like that because if it gets injured, it's game over. Why is it going to be doing that? You know, and I've just it's incensed me all the time in terms of what people think about gulls. Is that the same in the US? Do people, or North America, do people have this association with gulls that is
I get
based on aggression?
I get the impression it's worse, probably worse in the UK. Like I watch the negative publicity, the PR the Gulls get in the UK. It's always they're attacking people. I don't know how true it is, but here we don't have stories of gulls attacking people. But they are considered a nuisance in many of the urban areas. Um, Few people look at them as majestic creatures or interesting. So, as you said, they're more of a nuisance um, of an inconvenience for a lot of businesses, a lot of people trying to carry events in the city. But overall, I think when we talk to people about gulls and point out some things in the field, most people are pretty receptive to stopping and listening and watching the gulls with us. I often give people a pass when I hear them say seagull. That's not one of the first things I correct them on. But eventually, I do get around to telling folks that I talk to in public about gulls that a lot of these birds are terrestrial. They never really take to the sea. Um, but I don't know of any stories here where gulls have like dive bomb people and attack them. The horror stories that I hear from England are
Yeah.
next.
I have a story. I saw something on Twitter. This girl was on a beach, I presume in Los Angeles somewhere, and a laughing gull came down and grabbed her bikini top and nearly pulled it off because she had a striped bikini top.
Okay.
But I mean, there's a film of it actually being done, but
Yeah.
who knows? But you know what, Amar? It'd be great to actually find out about gulls. And I know you got a presentation, so let's hear your count on gulls, and then maybe we can have a quick chat afterwards.
Sure. Do you mind if I share my screen here?
Please do.
All right. So, as you guys know, gulls are the Gordian knot in avian identification. I think this is one of the reasons why they're so easy to hate, not just in the public's eye, but even among birders. I would say if you had to select any group of birds and ask birders, which group of birds can you do away with? And you wouldn't ever kind of miss them or be offended. I think a lot of people would pick gulls. And part of this is because of the identification challenges they present. A lot of people come to bird watching to relax, to enjoy nature. And then you got this ruckus group of birds that readily hybridize that present one identification challenge after the next. And so they're the perfect group for birders to shy away from and give up on. Um, but for a lot of birders, this is part of the appeal, is that the gulls are not as simple as, say, the passerines that go from juvenile plumage to adult plumage the next year. There is a lot of variety, a lot of feather minutia that one could spend a lifetime thinking about with gulls. And so I think if you're thinking about taking a deep dive with gulls, or you've been thinking about watching them more intently, um, start with your most common species and just do it with absolutely no pressure. It's a low stakes game. What you want to do is just begin with adults and get a good sense of their size, their structure, their shape, and move on to the younger age groups. And there is certainly something to see every month of the year. This is us in February on Lake Michigan. This is my event here, the Gull Frolic. We have about 150, 175 bird watchers who come out, and we spend the entire day here chumming on the lake shore. And we may begin the day with maybe 15, 20 gulls and end the day with 3,000 gulls. And it's a wonderful sight. We have the majority of our species here being herring gull, but we get a good assortment of Iceland gulls and lesser blackbacks and the occasional great blackback and glaucus gull in here. Again, this is the annual Illinois Ornithological Society Gull Frolic. So a challenge for you guys, for everybody listening today, I would submit to you that there's probably no other group of birds that is as equally at home on land, in the air, and on water as this group of birds. If you just try to wrap your head around the diverse habitats that these birds exploit, not just rooftops and cities and dumps, but we're talking cornfields, the ice pack in the Arctic, spruce trees out at sea. They are generalists, and probably more so than any other group of birds, more than crows, more than geese, more than pigeons. I think they take the trophy. This group of birds here is never at risk at going extinct. In fact, there's no gull species known to have gone extinct since records have been kept. I think that's pretty fascinating. There's no gull species known to have gone extinct for as long as modern taxonomy has kept records. So they are indeed an evolutionary success story. And I think going back to this idea of they're a nuisance, people view them as vermin, rats with wings. Part of this is because as humans, I think we're challenged by this notion that a bird can thrive in our environment and it can eat everything we eat. And it could withstand a lot of the tribulations that we do, right? I mean, you take hurricanes that come through the Gulf Coast, everything clears out during these hurricanes, but the gulls, for some reason, are still there, like waiting to monopolize on these conditions. Um, so I do find them to be probably the most resilient group of birds, more so than any other group. And they're always watching us, David. They're always stalking, right? Whether it be from a rooftop or a beachfront somewhere, they do a great job of exploiting all the handouts they can get, whether it be through our fisheries, through our agricultural practices, our landfills. They're there, but not all of them, right? I mean, these are the large white-headed gulls that seem to be comfortable with human presence. The smaller tern-like gulls, these guys right here, these birds are not very terrestrial. They don't like hanging out in urban jungles. The small tern-like gulls overall are exactly what the name suggests. They're very tern-like, nimble birds that, for the most part, are coastal or hanging out in the middle of a lake somewhere and not necessarily at your city parks. So I want to make that distinction here that there are two broad groups of gulls, the large white-headed gulls of the Laris species and the small tern-like gulls. So what we're seeing in this slide here, folks, is the largest gull in the world, the great blackback gull, and the smallest gull in the world, the little gull. Little gull is about the size of a robin. Um, the American robin, I'm not sure. I should be careful here. I'm not sure how similar in size it is to the European robin, but little gull is a very small 9 inch, 8.5 inch bird. I want to go back to this slide though. Gulls form a subfamily, so they don't have their own family. They are in the family of terns, skimmers, noddies, that family being Laridae. Gulls form their own subfamily of about 52 species, known as Larinae. And there's 11 genera in the gull family. Laris there on the bottom is the largest. So there's about 25 species in that genus, and these are things like herring gull, glaucous gull, yellow-legged gull, Caspian gull, all the large white-headed gull, even common gull and ring-billed gull, they're in Laris. Now these other genera that you see here with asterisks, these are single species units. So like Zima is Sabin's gull. Rhodesthethia is Ross's gull. Those are just single species in those genera. Um, so interestingly, check out this juxtaposition here. You got the largest gull in the world there and the smallest gull in the world. And about 20 years ago, these two were placed in the same genus. They were both part of the Laris genus until a very thorough phylogeny about 20 years ago started to suggest we have this wrong. This is too broad of a genus, and they broke it up into all these other genera. Um, our American herring looks a lot like the European herring, and a lot of taxonomies have split these things. The Americans still consider American herring and European herring conspecific. This will probably change next summer. But again, this idea of large white-headed gull, this four-year species here on the left, in their earlier plumages, they seem to present a lot of identification challenges. But the smaller gulls, Bonapartes, black-headed, and such, for the most part, they're very uniform, not a lot of variation. They tend not to give us many headaches as far as identification is concerned. I've mentioned, 4-year gull. What this means is it takes typically 4 molt cycles, and this is aligned with an annual cycle. It takes about 4 years to become adult as a herring. And for our ring-billed or common gull, for you folks, it would be 3 cycle. And for things like black-headed and Bonapartes, they take a little under 2 years to become adult-like. And so it's understood that the longer it takes to become adult-like, the more variation there's going to be in those earlier plumages. But also, these are longer life histories. So herring gull might live 30, 35 years, whereas a ring-billed gull might live for 20, 25 years, and Bonaparte's generally about 15 years. So it's interesting that for every year more it takes to become adult-like, these birds tack on about 5, 10 years of lifespan. Bonaparte's not very relevant for folks in Europe. Bonaparte's is the only gull known to consistently prefer nesting in trees. It prefers nesting in black spruce trees in particular. They're found throughout the tundra here in North America, and they don't actually breed in the States. They don't breed anywhere in the United States. There are reports of them breeding in Maine, but generally this is a Canadian breeder. Here we go. So, you guys recognize black-headed gull. They have this wide distribution across Europe and Asia, and what is referred to as breeding plumage here, many people call alternate plumage, and what is referred to as non-breeding plumage, here for folks who are in tune with molt terminology would refer to that as basic plumage. This is the same individual, by the way. This bird I photographed 3 months apart, about 4 months apart, in Maryland. So this is a pretty rare bird anywhere in the United States. Folks, are very enticed by a black-headed gull sighting. So I drove about 10 hours to see this bird from Chicago. And I came back 4 months later to see it again. It was still hanging out in the same parking lot. And you can see it here in breeding and non-breeding plumage. So, David, you just tell me how far you'd like me to go into this here. This is magical here, this slide. But if you need me to back off for a minute here for some questions or
No,
anything,
no,
just
no,
let.
no. What we'll do is you just keep going. We'll do the questions at the end after,
Oh,
Q&A. So you keep going. This is great. And I'm sure everyone else
so
will be here as well.
wonderful. Well, we talk about these identification challenges for birders with gulls, and in the public's eye, gulls being a nuisance sometimes. But most people, your average non-birder, have no idea that gulls like these four exist, right? These four are high on the list of most bird watchers. And I know bird watchers who've been birding 30, 40 years who've never seen a Ross's gull or ivory gull. These are high on the list of most birders. Ross's and ivory gull breed in the Arctic. So does Sabin's gull, actually. Sabin's is our longest migrating gull. They breed in the Arctic of Canada and Greenland, and places in Russia. And the ones in North America, amazingly, have this divergent migratory pathway where some of them migrate to the shores of Western South America, and some of them cross over the Atlantic, go down the western shores of Europe and down to South Africa. Their migration is almost equally impressive as Arctic terns, and they do hang out with Arctic terns, surprisingly, much more than they do with gulls. Little gull, it's more of an old world species. So you guys in places like Poland, they commonly get them there. Here in North America, the little gull population is thought to be about 400 individuals. And we're still not entirely sure if some little gulls are crossing the Atlantic, and we get some of those birds occasionally. But it is a wonder. It is a wonder. These small tern-like gulls are coveted bird species. I talked about Sabin's gull having the longest migration. This is an adult here in breeding plumage or alternate plumage. This is a small bird. It's not too much bigger than, say, a Bonaparte's or a little gull. That's that migration I said. There was a mated pair that they fitted with GPS trackers a few years ago. And what they found was the female, I believe, went down to the coast of South America, and the male went down to South Africa. And these birds, the next breeding season, migrated back north. They regrouped in the same colony and nested exactly where they were banded the summer before. So, is the first documentation of a mated pair of any birds in the avian world migrating down different oceans, wintering on different oceans, and then regrouping and nesting again the following year. This was the first documentation of that. But heavier material, we have the large white-headed gulls. This is the other half of the story. The Laris species, these typical what your average person thinks of when you say seagull. They see gray back, yellow beak, white head. But there is great variation in this group. In this group, we have the blackbacks, like lesser blackback, great blackback, kelp gull, slatyback. We also have the white-winged large white-headed gulls like Iceland gull and glaucous gull. We also have glaucous wing gull here in the United States and Canada, which is considered a white-winged gull. They're also found in Russia, by the way. Um, there are some evolutionary biologists, ornithologists, who think a lot of these large white-headed gulls are so genetically similar that they may just differ based on a few genes, and that the differences that we see in back color and wingtip pattern, again, may just be phenotypically just controlled by one or two genes. And so this is the least known group of birds. Genetically speaking, they defy most species concepts. An interesting thing to consider here is in places like Arctic North America, the glaucous gulls and herring gulls there don't show any genetic differences. So when you look at parts of their genome, you can't tell which one's a glaucous and which one's an American herring. Very different than, say, if you were looking at a common tern and a Forster's tern, you can readily tell this one's Forster's, this one's common. You can't do that with a lot of the large white-headed gulls, glaucous wing, the slatybacks, some of the herrings, and lesser blackbacks. And so they're definitely a puzzle. It's said that this group of birds has radiated faster and more recently than any other group of birds. Um, and there's a lot of hybridizing as well. And so that is adding to the genetic similarity in these taxa. As gull watchers, we typically use this Kodak grayscale to um, quantify back color. So if we go back to this slide here, this glaucous gull on the Kodak grayscale scores about a 2 or 3, sometimes a 4. Okay. And the lesser blackback gull scores anywhere in the 13 to 17 range. And so a lot of the literature will use these scores. I've used it in my recent gull guide. And it's overall a very simple system to follow. Most bird watchers in the field, though, never use these numbers, right? And we don't sit there and say that one looks like it's a 9 or an 8. These are generally just reserved for when we're looking at photos online, for the literature, when we're looking at museum specimens. Here's a trivia question, David, for you and for everyone listening. There's only one gull species that scores a 0 on the Kodak grayscale. Want to take any guesses at what that is?
Well, the first thing I think of would be ivory gull.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And that's our only all white gull that is just snow white. It's said that there's no gull that quite scores a 19. Um, Even the darkest things like fuscus, and kelp gulls seem to be just a little bit paler than a 19. At any rate, here in the United States, we have a lot of these medium grays, as you guys do as well, like yellow-legged and Caspian and Armenian, all those Eastern European taxa. Um, I would quiz the audience on these three, but I don't expect you guys to really know them. Perhaps the biggest one in the back, it's dark-eyed. It doesn't have black wingtip. It has grayish wingtips. That's a glaucous wing gull. And our most common large gull in North America in the middle here is American herring. And the dark-eyed one in the front with greenish yellow legs, dark eye, darker back is a California gull. Let me go back to this slide. So here in the United States, when we're studying gulls, like these three you absolutely have to know as benchmark species. For folks in the UK or places like Western Europe, it would be European herring and yellow-legged gull, first and foremost. There's size variation in these large gulls. Males are said to be about 20 to 30% larger than females. And it is quite noticeable when you have them together, especially if you go into these breeding colonies or in the summer, if you look at these rooftops where they're nesting and see the male and female together, just overall bigger bill, bigger body, um, thicker legs. And if you watch them long enough, you will get verification quite readily as to which one's male and which one is female. As I mentioned earlier, the earlier plumages in these birds, these large white-headed gulls, has a lot of variation, and it's stunning variation. These two birds are first cycle ring-billed gulls, so they're probably about 6 months old. The gray that you see on the back, this adult-like gray, these are new feathers. But consider how one has a lot of dark markings on the head and breast, and the other one's all white-breasted. What drives this sort of variation? We don't know. We don't know why there's so much variety in things like the large white-headed gulls. Again, with the smaller gulls, these are Bonapartes, they're fairly uniform. There's not a lot of variation here to the point where you would consider, am I looking possibly at two different species? These are both Bonapartes juveniles. But again, you get to the larger herring gull species and you have this sort of variation. These are what we consider typical Great Lakes American herring gulls. And these birds may have come from the same nest. This is how variable they are. One has an all black bill, the other one has a bicolored bill. This one's more chocolate brown, this one's paler. But overall, we don't suspect anything crazy here other than two typical American herring gulls. That plumage variation is a real thing. They're loving, caring parents. Most large gulls nest on rocky islands. A lot of them are ground nesters. In the Arctic, they tend to be more cliff nesting, similar to the kittiwakes. This is a juvenile ring-billed gull. This fuzzy little fur ball here that's probably a couple days old. It's interesting to note how well these birds mix into the background with their color there. They're quite camouflaged as juveniles. And so here's a challenge for you guys. How many juveniles do you see in this photo? And once you start looking around, you start picking up more and more, right? So I think the highest anybody has ever counted was nine in this slide, and I'm not entirely sure it's eight or nine, but these birds are less than a month old. This is on Lake Erie in Ohio. And a question for us to ponder is why do they hatch with these cryptic brown plumages? And why do they need 2 to 3 years, 4 years of subadult plumages? Something to ponder. We have the same thing with some of our raptors, for example, golden eagle and bald eagle. They take 4 or 5 years to maturate. But why is that needed? Why can't they be like songbirds where they're juveniles 1 year and then the next year they're adults? So these birds having these long life histories, 30 years plus, they invest early in life in gaining experience. And so these plumages literally suggest and hint that they don't have literally the reproductive organs yet that are functioning and able to breed. So these are social symbols. They tell others in the group this bird is not ready to breed. This bird has not gained enough experience exploiting different habitats and cannot hold a territory just yet. Now we do occasionally get like 3-year-olds that nest. There's records of this, but it's really exceptional. A lot of birds, even their fourth year, won't breed. If they're not ready to hold a territory and defend a territory, they might wait until their fifth or sixth year. But again, the idea is having 30, 40 years to live, you put off reproducing early in life until you've gained some experience. So it's a form of investment, reproductive investment. Um, One striking feature in gulls are these orbital rings, the skin around the eye. And it's often very noticeable in late winter and throughout the spring and summer. So this Kumlin's gull, which is a subspecies of Iceland gull, has a very noticeable pinkish raspberry colored orbital. And herring gull has this chrome yellow, orangey orbital. And it's now believed that these bare parts, the bill color, the leg color, are under strong sexual selection. Interestingly, these birds are achromatic for the most part. They're black and white and shades of gray. They don't have many beautiful colors except for these orbitals and bill color. And so I believe these colors are under strong sexual selection. Another question I like to ask folks is why don't males and females have different plumage patterns, different colors, right? Why isn't this like some of our other groups of birds, songbirds in particular? Well, these birds nest out in the open. There's no need for a female to have a cryptic plumage. She's not hiding in a bush or tree protecting a nest. They're all colonial for the most part, out in the open with nothing to hide. And so, just like boobies and gannets and a lot of the water birds, males and females overall, are not sexually dichromatic. They have the same colors, same patterns. Um, Even terns, right? If you think about things like common and Arctic tern, they're made up of blacks and whites and grays, and the males and females look alike. And the popular belief is that color in birds is an ancestral state, and that with time, these older lineages have lost color in the females, and that the smaller passerines still have color in males, but not in females. Um, when gull watchers, people are really into this pastime, let's say, when we get it into variation with these adults, we are typically looking at the wingtip patterns. These are both slatyback gulls from Asia. Slatyback gull is always a hot, popular topic in the United States and Canada. And I'm sure it is in Western Europe too. People are always on the lookout for them. But if you notice here, the wingtip patterns, the very, very tips here, right here, um, radically different. And so it's thought that these wingtip patterns are age related. So the one on the right here might be a young elder, a young adult, whereas this one here might be much older. And so after about 4 or 5 years, you really have no way of telling how old these birds are unless they have some type of leg band or some type of life history attached to them. So we might assume the one on the left is an older adult with all this white and reduced black in the wingtip because overall, these gulls tend to lose black in the wingtip as they age, and the youngest adults seem to show the most black in the wingtip. Just an interesting tidbit there. The next time you're looking at some of your local gulls, maybe just consider the wingtips when you see those wingtips open and compare them from one individual to the next. I think you'll find it fascinating. It's very much like fingerprints. All right. So how are we doing here, David?
Well, we should wrap up soon because I think some of the audience have been here for a little while. So,
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, I see some of the comments and questions in here. Why don't I go for about 4 or 5 more minutes here and then wrap it up?
yeah.
Thank you, sir. I like to show this collage here. I put this together probably 10, 15 years ago, and I revisit it every year and share it from time to time on Facebook. But there is quite a bit of variety, I think, in bill shape, bill size. The head markings are quite telling. For example, this 3B here in the center, dead center, that's a lesser blackback gull. They tend to have pretty streaky heads, and the red on the bill there is almost more exaggerated than any other gull species. And so we jokingly say lesser blackback is that one that looks like it went overboard with lipstick. Our ring-billed gull 2A here, ring-billed gull never shows red on the bill. There's never been an individual with red on the bill, and it's pretty unusual. The only other species we expect that with is like short-billed gull, common gull 4A. They also don't show red on the bill. But then you have things that are from different genera, like 2B is Bonapartes. They have this ear spot in the winter. 3C would be your black-headed gull. They take on that red bill base in the winter, and they lose their hood, interestingly. Anything here jump out at you, David, that you're hoping we can talk about, or does this do it for you?
No, I mean, we could go on all night. I mean,
Yeah, it's a lot of variety, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
Do you guys get pink on gulls out there? I think you do with like Mediterranean gull, black-headed gull, sort of.
Are you talking about natural pigments?
Yeah.
Yeah, occasionally the slender bill, well, actually not occasionally, the slender bill gull has a lot of pink on it, as does quite a few of the little gulls during the height of their, um, not the basic plumage, but the other one.
Yes, 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 and they're alternate plumage. So it's believed. So here's the deal with this pink. You see it also in a lot of terns, roseate tern, Arctic tern. Um, these reds and pinks and yellows and oranges that we find in birds, they're produced through a color mechanism, and it's through carotenoids. Carotenoids are found in plants, they're found in fish, they're found in a lot of these birds' diets. And so the only way they can get these red and pink colors is by ingesting carotenoids. It's the same pink that you see in like flamingos, for example. Interestingly, Franklin's gull and Ross's gull show it consistently. Like 90% of the population is expected to show pink at some time of the year. And so these two, Franklin's and um, Ross's, seem to metabolize these carotenoids a lot nicer than the other gulls. But we do see it in ringbills as well. Some of the ringbills feed in crabapple trees here on the Great Lakes, and they also get into these salmon farms. The salmon farmers actually feed their salmon carotenoids so the salmon can get this rich pink color because it's more attractive for the consumers. So the gulls in these huge salmon farms, they get into these ponds and they also ingest the carotenoids. Um, so I'm going to just close with this. If this was, say, Western Europe, I would recommend to your audience to know small, medium, large. At least get some benchmarks for yourself if you're just beginning. The big one in the back there with pink legs is a herring gull. The one in the center is a ring-billed gull, but for folks in Europe, you would want to focus on common gull for your medium-sized gull. And then the smallest one is a Bonaparte's, and your equivalent to Bonaparte's would be black-headed gull. So herring, common, black-headed gull if you're in Western Europe, and herring, ring-billed, Bonaparte if you're in the US and Canada. Learn your common species, begin with adults, enjoy them. They're birds. This should be done for pleasure. I do it for recreation. I don't have anything to prove to anybody. I think birders sometimes feel this pressure to always identify things correctly, but you don't have to. You do it because you enjoy it, and it gives us a lot to wonder about. And with that, I think I'll close. Thank you, David.
Fantastic talk, Amar. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, I love the idea of just enjoying the gulls. Just out of interest, when you say don't worry about identifying them, what percentage do you actually identify when you see a gull?
Um, so I go over big flocks of herring gulls. That's what I'm attracted to. I go find me a flock of 600 herrings, and from a group of 500, it's not unusual to have two or three that really trip me up. So that's my going percentage, I would say, maybe two or three out of 500. Um, as I mentioned earlier, there's so much distant and not so distant hybridization in this group that we're not really entirely sure when we see these weirdos if it's just a unusual herring or something with, say, three, four, 5 generations ago that had some glaucus influence, for example. It's almost impossible to know, and it's not something you can answer with binoculars usually. And even if you did get a DNA sample for a lot of these birds, it still wouldn't resolve it. So, um, to answer your question, probably two or three out of every group of 500.
Okay. I mean, I look at things like the herring gulls. You've got the American herring gull and you've got the European herring gull. As adults, I can't tell any kind of difference. I know the young American has the black, or sorry, dark tail compared to the European. But how come I look at lesser black back gulls like the one I have here, and I look at the ones in Scandinavia, the Baltic gulls, as they call them, and I can tell that the mantle is the same color as the wingtip. So it's almost as dark as a great black back gull, but more accentuated shape. And I think myself, in my unscientific mind, why is that not a species? When you got something like the American herring gull and the European herring gull, which I know a lot of people still, I mean, some people have split them already, but then you intimated it probably be split next year. Why is that not a species compared to those two? What makes that different?
Yeah, with the lesser blackbacks, they're all more or less genetically similar. And the problem with those type of taxa is there's nowhere to cleanly draw a line. So you have Fuscus and Intermedius that have some contact, and then you have Intermedius and Grailsii that have some contact, and it seems like Intermedius bridges them. And so if you did split them, then it becomes a question of what do you do at Intermedius? Does that go with Grailsii, the British lesser blackback, or does it go with Fuscus? And there's no easy answer. It's the same problem with the Iceland gulls, right? So I don't know. I'm sure you're aware that the Dutch had split them for some years, and they had Fuscus as Baltic gull for a number of years, and then they lumped them again because there's no easy answer for what you do with this intermediate population that seems to bridge both ends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Another quick question. What I mean, firstly, how many gull species do you think there are in the world? Because I've been told numbers ranging from 50 to 55. And of those gull species, which ones do you need to see? Have you seen all of them?
No, I still need Saunders gull. Okay, so to answer your first question, I'm not sure how many gull species there are. It's the taxonomies are very complicated. Um, I believe there's 52 to 53. Um, but depending on who you talk to, folks in Asia treat things like tamer gull as a good species. Some folks consider it an invalid taxon. Um, there are still some taxonomies that treat Thayers as a species. Most people now treat it as an Iceland gull. It's a very complicated question, and I think it's going to be a while before the phylogenies are completely sorted out with the large white-headed gulls. I just learned recently that Mongolian gull was given species status by the Clements taxonomy. And so most taxonomies up until about 6 months ago considered Mongolian gull a subspecies of Vega gull. So it's as you said, anywhere between 50 to 55, probably around 53-ish on the fair side. I still need to see Saunders. I still need lava gull. Lava gulls on the Galapagos. It's probably one of the smallest populations of gulls. I think there's something like 2,000 individuals, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Saunders, lava, and Pacific gull in Australia.
So not many. Um, in Britain, for example, I think the latest species of gull to be added to the list, if I'm not wrong, was kelp gull. Um, is there a gull that you expect to be seen in America or North America someday soon?
Yeah, we have a good chance of recording Caspian gull or Ottawan gull or perhaps even Mediterranean gull. But my feeling is it's going to be something from Europe, something that's been expanding in Europe. And there have been some sightings of Ottawan gull in Central and South America.
Wow.
Oh yeah, there's been consistently now for like the last 6 years, one seen annually, and they're different age groups. So there's a good chance someplace like Florida, perhaps somewhere along the Gulf Coast of the United States, Ottowan's gull, or perhaps a Mediterranean gull will blow over from the North Atlantic. Who knows?
Okay. Final question from me. Excuse me. With the proposed new name changes coming up, you've got a few gulls that are named after people such as Bonaparte's, of course, Sabines, Rosses, Franklins. I won't ask you for all of them, but what do you think Bonaparte's gull should be called now?
Bonaparte's being a tree nester, and right now its four-letter code is BOGU. I think a convenient switch would be boreal gull. BOGU would still be the four-letter code. Boreal gull might be a easy fix for Bonaparte's. Almost sounds similar too, kind of begins with the same syllable. So Bonaparte's boreal.
Okay, okay, Sabines.
That one's a bit tougher, man. That one needs to be held to a high standard. Um, I've thought about elegant gull or fork-tailed gull. There's no easy one for Sabines.
I've got a Sabine story for you actually. Sabine's gull was a gull that I vowed never to twitch because in 1987 I was on the Isles of Scilly in Western England and there was a massive storm that blew in a lot of Sabine's gulls in southeast England. So there were like 25 in London. I missed them. So basically, I rushed over um, after the storm and didn't see any. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm not going to twitch it. Cut fast forward 25 years or whatever, and I'm in Chile on Punta Arenas, the most southern town in Chile, walking along the coastline. I find a Sabine skull, and apparently it's the most southerly record ever for Chile. What a great way to see a Sabine skull.
Oh man. It's a treat anywhere you see Sabins.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't realize they winter off the ocean in the southern hemisphere. So you're just as likely to see them on a pelagic trip or something offshore in the south somewhere. So that's awesome. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, I was really proud of that one. Okay, well, I think we've kind of come to as far as we can go today. By the way, if you're watching this in the future on YouTube, please like and subscribe because in conservation with, there's so many different subjects. I mean, this is a brilliant one we're talking about now, but there's other amazing things that can be watched. So please tell your friends and like and subscribe. Final question, very quickly for you, Amar. What is your favourite Larid?
Oh, I'm gonna go with Franklin's gull. Franklin's is we sometimes call it a prairie dove here in North America. It breeds on marshy wetlands here in the interior. It migrates down the interior. It times its migration with the fall harvest, and then they eventually make their way down to Peru and Chile by the millions. You can go down there in about a month and literally happen on 500,000 Franklin's gulls in flocks. So they're very tight flocked species, and then they migrate right back through the interior in the spring with black heads. Franklin's gull, and by the way, they're the only gull in the New World that has two complete molts. So rarely are they worn and faded. They almost always show fresher plumages than the other gulls.
That's amazing. I remember seeing a massive flock, as you talked about, when I was in Texas once. I wondered what it was. There's a flock of, I thought, well, they're obviously gulls, but they're like starlings. They're like a murmuration. I was like, wow, I've never seen gulls do that before, and I realized that they were Franklins. Listen, today has been absolutely amazing. I'm so happy that we've done this. Your book is incredible. I wish you luck with it. Everyone watching this, go out and get this. This is actually causing a massive stir in the birding world at the moment. Everywhere I look, I see this cover. So it's doing well. Amar, thank you so much and good luck. And yeah, just thank you.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity. Good talking to everybody. Sorry for again the delay in time. That's not me. I like always being on time. I'm the one always telling people, let's be on time, let's be on time. So, but it was good chatting with you guys. I hope you had some good nuggets that you can walk away with here and come back and rewatch this in the future.
And talking about you guys, thank you, Zoomers, for watching and actually being here and supporting in conservation with. Until we meet again, keep looking up.